Yeah, this is Brett Williamson, a SuperFlow technical support engineer. And what we're going to do here is just a little quick overview of our Powermark test cell here at SuperFlow in Colorado Springs to give you a basic idea of what has to be connected on your new systems. So let's take a look.
So this is our old test cell. We no longer have a test cell like this at SuperFlow Colorado Springs, but the general ideas that are going to be presented in this video should give you a good idea how to set up a test cell and to connect the cables that go to your new SuperFlow Powermark dynamometer system.
As you can see, we've got our engine already mounted up. Our engine stand is in place, a docking card is docked, and we have our sensor box mounted on our boom. So let's point out what we've got going on here. Start up here at the front of the engine. We've got a oil cooler in place down here. Your system may or may not have one of those, but as you can see, we've got water lines on both sides of it going to it, and that's so that we can run without worry of overheating our oil. Again, your system may or may not have that. You can see we've got the drive shaft connected here. We have our mounting bracketry here for the back side of the engine. The coupling plate, adapter plate with the constant velocity joint mounted to the flywheel. Drive shaft in place, and the coupling back here on the absorber. You can also see the magnetic pickup and the tack gear. The magnetic pickup is going to have its own cable that runs up to the sensor box. We'll go around on the sensor box and see that here in a minute. Over here on this side also, we've got our Morse cable for our throttle actuator, and you can see that that's running up into the ceiling and goes out to our console. Absorber in place inside the test stand, along with the starters as well. Upper servo valve, and down inside here you have a lower servo valve, and those will have cables going to them as well. We'll show you those cables in just a moment. Actually, here's one of them right here, and the other one down here. You shouldn't have to mount the servo valves. They should already be mounted in your stand when you receive it. In the back here, we've got the cooling tower, and you'll see various hoses going to the cooling tower. Hoses for filling, hoses for draining, and then the hoses that are going out to the engine. Okay? Let's look at this side of the sensor box. This side of the sensor box has got a pressure panel, and we've got a variety of pressure lines. Your application may be different than ours. We're measuring fuel pressures, manifold pressures, oil pressures, etc. One of the things to keep in mind about installation on these is that if you've got any kind of lines with fluid in them, you're going to want to bleed the air out of them in order to get fast reaction for your sensors. If you've got air inside the line, then the air is being compressed. Sometimes your sensor will be somewhat delayed, particularly things like oil pressure sensors and fuel pressure. Thermocouple panel, 16 channels of temperature measurement. Again, it'll be up to you to decide where you want your temperatures to be taken from. We have various sensors on our engine. We've got sensors up here for water temperature. We've got sensors down here for oil temperature. You'll want to decide where you mount your pressure or your temperature sensors. You can see one here. We've got a drain plug on the oil pan. So it's kind of up to the user as to where you want to measure temperatures at. I highly recommend that on your temperature sensors that you label all of them with a Sharpie so you know which one's going where. Label at both ends. You're going to often use extension cables, as you can see we've done here, and if you're tracing down a bad thermocouple later on, you'll want to have those all labeled so that you know where they go. Engine control panel. you're going to feed battery voltage into this connection. So you'll have a cable that came in your kit that you'll run off to your battery, and then that battery voltage, when it's turned on, this light here will come on, and then you'll be able to switch these functions, ignition, starter, and fuel, along with an auxiliary power switch from the console. We've got an extra panel in ours. It's an analog voltage panel that has 8 voltage inputs, all 0 to 10 or 0 to 20. And typically, if you have one of those, you're probably looking at measuring 8 channels of wideband. So you'll have 8 colored connectors to plug into those for your wideband O2 sensors. Let's walk around to the other side. You can see here we've got a cable strung for our air turbine. Our air turbine is sitting here on the floor. So if you're going to mount the air turbine here on the carburetor, then this would be the connection. You're going to want to run a cable there. We've got our wideband sensor plugged into the exhaust here. We ran that cabling up through this harness back to our wideband sensor, and we mounted an AFX unit underneath the sensor box here. We just used some Velcro to do that. You may want to do the same. Over here on this side, we've mounted our ignition components down here in the center section below the drive shaft. That's a acceptable place to put it if that's what you want to do. Strain gauge mounted here on the absorber. Again, it will have its own cable. The cable will be part of what you're going to run over here to the sensor box. So now we get to this side of the sensor box, which is where most of your connecting of cables is going to go. You're going to have cables marked individually for each servo valve. These cables are not interchangeable. They are marked specifically to go into the correct connection, so make sure that you get those correct when you put your servo valve cables onto your servo valves. So you're going to run a cable from, in this case, this is the outlet valve, and this is the inlet valve, and you're going to run those cables down to the inlet valve and the outlet, which is down here in the bottom. This panel here, you're going to have 2 cables marked X console serial 1 and 2. Those are going to go out to the X console that's sitting out there on the table. You're going to have a computer network cable that's going to go out there as well. That would either go to the computer directly, or in this case, since we're using the new IceRock tablet, it's going to go to the router. And we'll see that when we go back out and look at the console. We have an extra connection here that says serial aux 2. Most likely you will not have that connection, nor will you have a connection for serial aux 1 or the relay box. The black amp connector panel, you're going to have cables individually that go to each of those. You're going to have a load cell cable. That's going to go down here to the strain gauge. You're going to have the TAC pickup cable. That's going to go to the magnetic pickup that we saw over here. You'll have, possibly, if you bought the fuel system measurement, you'll have the Fuel 1 and Fuel 2 measurement turbines. In our case, those turbines well, I saw them in here last week and they've moved them on me. If I see them, I'll point them out. But those are going to go to your fuel measurement turbines. This connection here where it says aux 1 and 2, these 2 connections right here are what are going to the wideband O2 sensors. We've got one here, and then we have a second one that we use. I think it's a Daytona sensor box that we've got somewhere around here. I'm not sure where it's at. Where it says throttle, if you have an electric throttle actuator, you're going to have a cable that's going to plug into throttle. You're not going to have anything that plugs into switches or servo valve. For the Powermark systems, the servo valve connections are on these two panels up here. The connector that says dynamometer, we use that when we run chassis dynamometers, so you won't be using that one either. And then here where it says control 3 and control 4, you won't use those either. You'll have a power cable underneath, and what I recommend is that you stress relieve that cable if you can so that it can't vibrate out. If it falls out while everything's running, of course everything drops, and if you're running your engine at that point, then your engine would unload because the servo valves would unload as well. So it's a good idea to kind of stress relieve that if you can so that it can't possibly vibrate out while testing. Again, over here you can see our cooling tower. We've got our reservoir up here and the cooling heat exchanger here. The temperature adjustment is here. Tightening the spring raises the temperature. That pretty much covers everything here in the test cell. Hopefully that gave you a fairly good overview.